Welcome to Thrive and Shine HR, a podcast and video series dedicated to helping us overcome the limiting beliefs, self-doubt, and imposter syndrome that so many of us HR professionals face. Here are your hosts with over 45 years experience in HR and certified life coaches, Jen and Katherine. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Thrive and Shine HR. Hi, Katherine. How are you doing
on this
Friday evening? We are live for anybody joining our video cast today. So today's episode topic or its title is I Want to Love HR, how to refresh the passion and purpose in your career. Katherine, let's start out with talking about things that we love. So question for you as we get going, what is something this week that you love? Oh, you're on mute, Katherine. Uh-oh. We seem to have lost her. There it is.
That was so weird. I'm not touching anything. Okay. What I love is HR people are my people. I know this without a shadow of a doubt. No matter where I travel in the world, no matter where I'm speaking, HR people are my people. And I love that connection. And I love that instantaneous camaraderie and understanding of somebody else, but also feeling like I am understood. I spoke at the Maryland SHRM conference this last week. It was so incredible. I did a virtual conference with Central California SHRM, and HR people are just my people. And that is what I love about our profession, truly. What about you?
This week we have been playing around with a new logo and a new, the new intro that we got to see this, today, which we're still tweaking. But these are the things that I get so excited about, and I'm so in love with. I'm in love with this podcast. I'm in love with what we've created in terms of like the ability to share what we get to share and do what we get to do. And every episode I get so excited as I'm preparing and putting my notes together. And I was like, wow, what a gift. What a gift, we have to be able to do this. And so, yeah, without a doubt, this community and this podcast and you, Katherine, definitely love you working with you.
Yeah, same. All day, every day. It's the best.
Oh, awesome. Well, let's dive in. Let's talk about loving HR. So today's episode is really about what it takes to find our spark, what it takes to rebuild and reignite our spark and our flame, which for everybody is going to ebb and flow and go up and down at times. What do we do about that? And then, how can we maintain and keep finding that spark throughout our career in human resources? So with that, why don't we get going? So it's been a while since we've had this podcast, 34 episodes to be exact. And it's been a while since we've asked a question quite like this. So what originally, Katherine, drew you into a career in human resources, and how has it evolved over the years?
Well, so funny you asked that question. And I love that it's just right off the bat. I actually just spoke about this in Maryland. Back in the 90s, when I was in college, when I was in undergrad, there was no HR degree. That did not exist. I know you and I have talked about this before. It did not exist. So I went to school. I double majored in business and sociology. I took some graduate level ethnography classes. I just loved social science. I love people. Everything about people, everything about humanity, everything about community, all of it. And I think I'm hardwired with a business mindset too. So I wanted to do something that balanced both of those things. And long story short, I moved to Aspen, Colorado, got a job at the Ritz-Carlton, and I went to my very first day of orientation. It was not called onboarding back in the 90s. It was straight up called orientation. There was no term of onboarding, right? And this woman conducted the training. She was young. She was probably in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. And I was like, I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to inspire people in their jobs. I want to lift people up. I want to educate people on how to do that, on how to come to work as your best self. That language was not used back in the 90s. So I saw someone that inspired me. I was like, what department is she in? HR? Okay, she's a trainer. Okay. And within 6 months, I had my first job in HR. Not at that company,
Wow.
a different company, but yeah. So that was really what lit the spark for me, and it has absolutely changed over time. And that spark, it's not always this huge burning flame. It's seasonal for me, and I've embraced that seasonality. And once I started understanding, it's like riding the wave that so many of us talk about if we're in therapy. That just made all the difference for me. Instead of just expecting it to be this, oh my God, I'm going to love every second of HR, it just hasn't been that way for me. But the flame absolutely comes back, and it takes intentionality. But we'll get into that today. What about you? I mean, what originally drew you to HR?
Yeah, it was super similar. I mean, I
No
think we
way.
both have talked about, both of us kind of getting in to HR, which is like such a common story for people in HR when you get in by accident or a happen chance, or I stumbled into it and all
Yeah.
of that. But I think, it for me, it's so similar around having a deep understanding of wanting to do something that could have an impact around people, right? I knew I wasn't a widget person. I knew from the
A
very beginning that I
waha?
was what now? I was a people person. I was about relationships, and I always kind of knew that there was like a knowing within me. But you know,
Oh,
as I have really kind of grown within my years of HR, it's almost like, oh, bless her heart, when you get into it and think you are going into it to be able
yeah.
to kind of focus on helping people grow and develop, and all of that still holds true all these years later. But at the same time, like you had mentioned, there's so much more that goes into it, and we'll talk about that. But I think, honestly, when I really kind of thought about and I checked in with myself about this question, my core of like the why of wanting to be able to make that impact at the human level, similar to you, is still the same. It's still kind of the same. And so that really was kind of cool to reflect on that question and say, you know what, actually, when I really think about like why I would be driven to want to help and to want to, support and develop and all of that, that's all pretty much not change that much, even if everything else
Mm,
is, it gets loud around it. It's really kind of about the
totally.
heart of wanting to be able to make a difference.
100%. Yeah, that humanity connection, that wanting to help other humans on this planet. I think that's just highlighted for HR people. It's everything for us. And what a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, so next question. What are some early warning signs that HR professionals may be losing passion for their work and or without passion or a spark altogether?
When I read that question, a hyphenated one word answer came to mind. And I don't know if this is right or wrong, but it was so strong that I was like, I just have to go with this answer. And it's self-sabotage.
Ooh.
Yeah. I mean, when I reflect back on, all right, when did you really start to lose your passion? When did that spark kind of start to extinguish? And what's interesting for me is that if I'm being really honest with myself, it was an internal indicator. It was me drinking too much.
Mm.
It was me, instead of, after a hard day of work, I wanted to escape. And my chosen form of escapism for most of my HR career was self-sabotage, was escaping through alcohol. And not necessarily going out and getting blackout wasted or anything like that, but certainly whether it was coworkers, whether it was with friends, whatever it was that self-sabotage. And as I look back over the course of my career, over the course of 27 years, that really was a super, super strong sign that at the time I didn't see it as a sign, because self-sabotage, the very simple definition of it is it's a behavior with a negative consequence on the back end. So any sort of negative consequence. My negative consequence was, okay, well, it felt really good to escape or trauma bond with my coworkers, especially if one of my bosses, one of the board members, would take me out for drinks and say, hey, I need to talk to you about a situation, right? So we would sort of trauma bond while drinking, talking about the issues going on in the workplace. And it didn't help. There was never a follow-up conversation of, okay, what are we going to do about it? It was just trauma bonding. It was like, woe is us. And then I felt terrible the next day, and I wasn't able to give whatever percentage of the best version of myself was available for me that day. It was always, tens and 20% less than. And that just wasn't okay. And I just didn't see it at the time. So probably an interesting answer, but it's what came from my gut the minute I read that question. What about you?
It is like the answer that I think it's really funny because I put 6 different things that came up for me when I was thinking about it, right? So, like, what would I see as being warning signs of potentially where you're losing that spark or that drive? So I said less engagement, doing the bare minimum, gossip, performance issues, absenteeism, low energy. And then you come in and throw out really the answer to all of it, right? I mean, every single one of them, being less engaged, doing the bare minimum, gossiping, not performing as your best self, all of those really, if we're truly being honest with ourselves, are self-sabotage.
Oh, yeah.
So when you said that and when you called that out, I wrote it down immediately. I mean, that is it. Absolutely. Is what are those behaviors that we start doing when we're just not feeling that oomph for that role anymore? And how can we recognize that those self-sabotaging behaviors are present?
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, I mean, you can frame it, you can package it in all kinds of different ways, but at the end of the day, if we're being very, very honest with ourselves, we are sabotaging ourselves from within.
Oh, yeah. Another one, and by the way, I love the examples that you just gave. I mean, we're absolutely saying the same thing. Another one that's really coming up for me, just an example, as opposed to over drinking, is overeating. And because you and I are women in HR, because our target audience in this podcast is women in HR, I'd be remiss not to bring this up. When I was speaking at the Maryland SHRM conference, I brought up my overeating, my emotional eating. And I cannot tell you how many women message me on the Hoova app. For those of you who've been to conferences, you have an app, you have the ability to interact with speakers. And there are some women who always come up right after a conference and we engage in a dialogue. But there are other people who message me, right? They're a little more shy, a little more introverted. Maybe they're running off to another session. Who knows? I can't tell you how many women said, thank you for being so honest about how much you overeat, how much you turn to food, how much that was self-sabotage. And it was just a message to yourself of, you are trying to numb the pain through food. So I just want to bring that up today as well. If any of our listeners are self-sabotaging through alcohol or food, you're not doing anything wrong. You're not. It's just a sign that you're probably losing your passion. There's something going on and you just got to pay attention to it. Hopefully get to the root, but you're not doing anything wrong. Just start paying attention a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that we might be doing that could be kind of numbing away the sense of not feeling that, that excitement or that happiness for that role. Yeah, it's ooh. But that's where it can be so important as you're recognizing that I'm just not feeling it anymore. And then being able to see, okay, then what am I doing about it? And many times it will be, oh, I'm drinking more, oh, I'm eating more, oh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm on social media, I'm disengaging, I'm
scrolling.
Being able to kind of just have that awareness from a non-judgmental but very perceptive place can be super, super powerful.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So good, Jen.
So, all right, in your opinion, how can we balance the more difficult, challenging aspects of HR, like dealing with conflict and difficult people, with staying passionate for our jobs?
I think I'm going to have a really interesting answer for this question. I'm flashing back so much to the Maryland Sherm conference. And actually, she was a one-on-one coaching client, then joined HR Empower Hours. So we have been doing coaching together for over a year now. She came to my session, which was so fun to have her like right there. So great to just see like a familiar face. And something that she mentioned was she loves challenges. She loves dealing with difficult people because she enjoys that part of HR. Just seeing somebody, she views people, and I agree with her on this. She views difficult people as people who are really hurting underneath. Mm. She can see behind the mask, and so can I. And once you realize it's not about you and your job is to help people, you sort of start reframing quote unquote difficult people. And you start seeing the quote unquote challenges. This may sound a little bit cheesy. So if it rubs you the wrong way, this is meant for you. You are meant to hear this. That challenge is actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to help somebody. And I get it. Like people present very mad, very angry with victim mentality, but that's what they're presenting with. What lies underneath that is what human resource is all about. It's about getting to the root, seeing their humanity, coaching them in a way so they start thinking about, well, why am I showing up in this way? And really, really helping people stop being so quote unquote difficult and start showing up in a helpful way in the workplace. So for me, it goes back to Paul Stoltz's work on adversity. He has this whole thing called AQ, the adversity quotient. So look it up. If you've never heard of this guy, he's brilliant. And just realize that if you're suffering with victim mentality, you're going to avoid challenging situations. If you have thrival mentality, you're going to welcome those challenges. So if you are thinking, oh my gosh, this is really hard, this is a challenge, and it's not a positive thing, it just means you're in HR survival mode. And the way to get out of that is to choose totally different thoughts. And that's what we do as coaches. That's how we live. So that would be my answer. It's just that awareness. Notice your thoughts. And are you looking at something in an avoidant manner or not liking it in a resistant manner? Or are you somewhere over here on the spectrum really harnessing that like, oh my God, thank God this was actually brought to my attention because I know I can help. It's a very, very different thing. And the other part is a lot of HR practitioners that I work with are just exhausted. They're exhausted, and we only exhaust ourselves by the thoughts that we're choosing. So it truly is a mindset. And I know a lot of people have resistance to that sometimes because they're like, oh, it's not just mindset, but it is. But it actually is. And it's the best news ever because you can actually tweak that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
My gosh. That was so good. Oh my gosh. I mean, to be able to take that question and really be able to recognize, well, how do you define difficult, right? Or how do you choose?
Dang.
Right. And so I think that to be able to see the opportunities within that role and recognize how much self-empowerment comes from the ability to not take things personally, to recognize, that people's stuff is not, about you. And then also to be able to really be fine-tuned into how we might then be having triggers come up for us and recognizing how we can navigate those and still be able to show up in a very helpful and effective way that does not have it clouded with our own emotional baggage, right? Our own emotional judgments and perceptions and opinions. How do you kind of give a sense of neutrality to all of that? And I think, what you talk about is exactly, my notes as well for this question is really about the practice that you can put in and really make of it what you what you truly want to make of it, and recognizing that there are going to be, there are going to be different things that can make it, a little bit more challenging and this and that, but it's really about, having that intention
Mm,
around, showing up without having a lot of, like you said, holding on to, right? I can't remember the word that you used, but, really holding on to expectation and holding on to things that you you don't need, right? To be able to kind of have that refreshed perspective and detach from that and just be able to just be present, I think
mm,
is the work that, yeah, it just takes time to build that in, that level of self-awareness. And the
yeah.
more that, with you and I, even in our 34 episodes, you think about, like, that level of self-awareness takes practice. It's
Oh,
it's it's
amen.
it's not something that is going to just be like, okay, I got this down, it's good to go, right?
Nope.
You've got to be willing to kind of, each time there's a triggering situation, whether it's, coming from someone else or from within, to be able to question, to be curious, to be, to have that non-judgmental perspective so that you can be able to, yeah, look at it from an awareness that is less attached.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it very much was similar to your answer.
Yeah.
And then just kind of in addition to that, it's about recognizing the effort that goes into it. You're going to get what you give. And I love what you said about the participant at the Maryland conference who was like, I love that. That's exactly what I love. And I think, when you can recognize it for what it is and not get sucked into it as it being a quote unquote problem, or, a bad, this is the bad part of my job, and really it just is, it
Yep.
helps to release a lot of that weight that can come from it.
So good. I'm having a visual of like, there was this video, and I may have to find it for our show notes, of this speaker on stage literally carrying these huge weights. He would choose a thought and he'd pick up a weight. He'd choose another disempowering thought and pick up a weight. And it was all about like how he was approaching his job. And if you're carrying these weights around, it was just such a powerful visualization of this man, like ultimately carrying like 80 pounds of heavy, heavy dumbbells because of the thoughts that he was choosing.
I
So
love
that, yeah, I'm gonna have to
that.
find it. It was so good. And we've all heard, what's in your backpack, how much weight are you carrying? But there was something very different about this visual. And just literally the process of him bending down and choosing those thoughts and picking up that weight and that heaviness. And that's not going to help any. I mean, the whole way to refresh that passion is just to drop those thoughts, to recognize, oh my God, it's my thoughts. It's not Joe Schmo over here not showing up to work on time. It's the thoughts I am choosing about Joe Schmo not showing up to work on time that are dragging me down. So it's the inner game. And I still think it's the coolest thing ever. That's the key to passion. It's the key to finding purpose in our career. 100%.
Well,
Oh,
good. Well, let's jump
okay.
into this next one, because now
Well,
we're going
let's
to
do.
start getting into specifics on how do we
Okay.
do this. So, what role does self-care and boundary setting play in maintaining passion and energy for our HR work?
I mean, everything. I want to drive this point home with a story. Jen, I know you know this. I don't think our listeners know this, but my father broke his femur here in my home in the middle of Marble, Colorado. We're very, very remote. Um, and talk about self care. I both of my, my father broken femur, my mother has neuropathy, so she has a walker, and I spent 15 days in two different hospitals in the ICU or PCU caring for my dad. Flew them home, got them to Cincinnati. United lost all of our luggage, but I can't be mad at them because they were so amazing to us in the airport. It was not like, fine, lose our luggage. My dad on oxygen made it home safely to
Hmm.
Cincinnati. My mom on her walker made it home safe to Cincinnati. That's all I cared about. All I cared about. Okay. So this is going on while I am walking away from a long-term client down in Southern Colorado. This is all happening at the same time. And this is life in HR, right? Things happen at work, things happen at home, and they affect the other, how we are showing up. And I was so intentional with how I was choosing to be every single day. My thought work, I doubled down on my thought. I was so intentional. Okay, you are going to take care of your parents. This is what matters most. And I did that for 15 days, right? Stayed at a hotel in Cincinnati, got up at 4 a.m. the next day, flew to Maryland, and was on for 3 days in a row, sun up to sundown at a conference. And I wouldn't have had it any other way because being at that conference gave me energy. I loved every minute of it. I loved every single person I met. And that to me was a real, for me, with all the things I have going on in my life. And if you're taking care of aging parents, any of our listeners out there, I feel you. It's a whole new phase of life, whole new level of responsibility, caring for the people who brought you into this world and raised you. I'm talking like pulling up undies of your parents in an airport bathroom while they're on oxygen and with a broken femur. I mean, this is a very, very interesting time of life. So talking about needing self-care, I prioritized it. I got it on my schedule every single morning and I made it happen. And when I thought of, oh, you should really be in the hospital at 6 a.m. with your dad, it was, no, you're going to go for a run quickly every morning. And then you're going to be fully present with your mom and your dad. And then you're going to pop over to the family room and you're going to get the work done that you need to get done. And then you're going to have conversations with your client as you're consciously uncoupling after 18 months of working together. So for me, I knew what I needed to do in terms of self-care. And for me, that's moving my body and that's running. And it's funny because it's also coupled with boundaries. If there is not a willingness on an employee's end, on a boss's end, to go about things differently, to improve, look, there are bad bosses out there. There are. It's okay to walk away, but we have to do it with love. And all of that was happening for me in the last couple of weeks. And it was the self-care that allowed me to refresh, to stay ever present. It was the people at the Maryland SHRM conference where I focused all of my energy and just, it was this really cool feeding frenzy. It was like we were all putting the logs back on the fire, and together and collectively, we were coming up with solutions of how to approach HR in a new way. And it was so fun and invigorating. So I'm not saying that bad things don't happen. My father's broken femur, like having to have that time, that was a really, really challenging time, truly. And sort of goes back to what I meant when we first started talking about this. It was like, I still needed to maintain my self-care, what works for me. And the other thing, and I know I'm kind of all over the place, but the second part of this question is about boundaries. And one thing we get wrong with boundaries is we think it's a matter of telling somebody what our boundaries are. We think boundaries are walls, but boundaries are actually built between two people. So for me, boundaries I was putting up with my former client, we did it together. We made decisions together. I didn't tell him what I was going to do. He didn't tell me what I was going to do. We had a conversation and together we decided what the best path forward was, which was really cool. And I feel really good about that exit. I hope he does too. Haven't talked to him in a while because I was really focused on my mom and my dad and then going to Maryland. So anyway, self-care is everything. Going about boundaries is everything too. And if you are dealing, and I heard this a lot at the Maryland SHRM conference, if you are truly dealing with somebody, a boss who just, you're not aligned in terms of values and you're just continuing to do this, you have changed the way you've been approaching your boss a million different ways. You've shown up differently and it's just not working. It's also okay to go seek out another opportunity. It's okay to do that. Just saying. Boy, that was kind of all over the place for a Friday night. Did you follow any of that, Jen?
I followed every bit of it. I mean, Kathy, what an amazing story of how critically important it is to be able to stay on the discipline of self-care and self kind of maintaining a sense of agency for ourselves when
Yeah.
we're going through something like you've just been through. So
Yeah.
I got to tell you, like I just like I'm not worthy listening to that, and it's really, I think, such a testament of your will around, knowing the things that you must do for
Must.
yourself in order to be able to kind of function the way that you do in terms of
Hmm.
transparency and communication and setting up, those boundaries, like you said, that, taking that run, even though our little guilt, is going to
Oh
start
my God.
poking in from the first thing you wake up in the morning. But having that sense of discipline to be able to do it anyway, that's self-care. And what's so interesting about self-care is so often we don't realize that sometimes self-care is saying no, right? Sometimes self-care is doing the thing that's
Amen.
hard. Sometimes self-care is not at all a sense of getting that little bubble bath, right? It's really about doing the hard stuff. And so what you've done over these past 15 days is the hard stuff. I am like
It was hard.
amazing. And I think, what you're talking to is very similar to the example that I had in the situation, which was,
I can't wait.
you know, is really similar around. I was in a position where there was just so much happening at once, right? We had open enrollment happening. We had a new HR system happening. We had manager turnover happening. It's all
Oh
of it
yeah.
kind of compounded
Oh yeah.
without control. You feel completely powerless. It's all over the place, right? And I think similar to your situation, it was about one step in front of the other. However, at this time, this was about 5 years ago, and at that time, I was a pretty heavy drinker. I
Yeah.
was a pretty heavy into numbing behaviors, like we talked about
Yeah.
before, and so at that time, I was really just surviving, right?
Yes.
And not realizing that I was perpetuating my own suffering, because instead
Totally.
of allowing myself just to process through and work through whatever, is going on, I was rushing for the drink, or I was rushing for the pie, or, whatever it was, without really recognizing the pause and recognizing the moment of slowing ourselves down sometimes to really understand what's happening. Because I think you
Mm.
brought up a really good point that sometimes we might be in this fight, flight, or freeze, and we're not really paying attention to some of the warning signs that are trying to tell us maybe something is wrong. And instead, we're trying to power our way through, certain situations without really kind of recognizing, wait a second, should I even really be going down this path or doing
Mm.
this? And so it's really important to take that step back and recognize, okay, I need to give myself a breather, so I'm not acting out of emotion. I'm not acting from a place of emotional, um, kind of irregularity, right? That we can
Yes.
come to a more of a place of neutrality. And so
Yes.
that to me is like something that I look back on. That was one of the more challenging times in my period of HR. I was
Mm.
on job boards almost every day,
Yep.
not realizing in my brain, right, that I was doing it to myself, going back to the self-sabotaging behaviors. But I was so convinced with myself, rather than seeing this as a natural flow of how things can be sometimes, when you're going to compound all the things that are going to be a part of the role from time to time, and not then taking that stock, that's really a part of it, right? That a part
Yep.
of it is going to be that it's going to be a little rough right now, like your 15 days. I'm just going
Mm.
to strap myself in and then I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. I'm going to take that run, and then I'm going to go and do this, and I'm going to go and do this. And I think so often when we get into those fight, flight, or freeze, we're not taking that time to
No,
really be intentional, and
no.
intentional from a place of whether you like it or you don't like it. You got
Whoa.
to do it. And so that level of intention, when we are, faced with those times that it really
Oh,
feels difficult to get that sense of passion and purpose, I think is a non-negotiable. It's become a non-negotiable for me, but it can be difficult sometimes to catch, and you have to like be very intentional there as well, right? Like what's
yeah.
really going on, and how am I really feeling about this, and do I need like a gut check around the thinking that might be causing me to slip and slide. So it's really a factor of just being really aware and conscious from moment to moment, especially when you're going through a bumpy chapter.
Yeah, totally. I'm I I was working with a team of women, a department with a client, and all women, and they have a really hard job. And the language we started adopting after a really healthy discussion on that passion and wanting to be passionate, and that you can't possibly be 100% passionate every single day, especially like when life happens for us, right? So what these women started doing is asking one another, how much can you give right now? How much can you give? And this goes back to Brene Brown. Brene Brown talks about this because that's where I picked it up. That's when I tabled it as a possible experimentation for the group, and they latched onto it, and they're still using it to this day. This is something we talked about in the spring. So it's, how much passion do you have right now? And if somebody says 20%, and you're like, oh, well, I've got 100, so we're covered. But if the other person says, yeah, I've got about 90% today, and you're like, good, because I'm at 30. And you just start having a conversation. It's about true partnership, and it's being okay. It's allowing yourself some self-care when you're not at 100%. We've got to stop telling ourselves and stop pushing ourselves so hard. We do that as women, and we shame ourselves when we can't give 100%. And that's where I think working with your team members, whether they're your HR team members, your executive leadership team that you're on, whatever that is, I think just having that awareness. And this is also about boundaries. It's recognizing the care you need and working with somebody else to say, how much can you give today? And if you're both at 20%, it's okay to maybe not get everything done on the checklist today. Give yourself that grace, give yourself that space, because tomorrow is a new day and you just don't know. I mean, talk about the self-care. Eat well, sleep, hydrate, just the basics we all know, but you actually have to practice them. That's another one too.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And it evolves, it evolves from day to day. It evolves depending on what's
Yes.
going on with us. And so,
Yes.
the real key to this is, again, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, is really making that a practice,
Yeah.
that, you have that awareness around where you're at. I love that kind of gauge idea. I
Yeah.
mean, what a great way to really be able to kind of check in with yourself and check in with others.
Yes,
If you're in an
exactly.
HR department, you've got an HR team, great. If you're an HR
Great.
department of one, that's okay too. You can find others out there to be able to start having these types of conversations and start to reach
Absolutely.
out for that type of community, because I think there's something really, really powerful about that, to be able to say, you know
Totally.
what, I don't got it in me. And the other, whoever, that accountability buddy can say, that's okay. I
Okay.
got you.
Yeah.
Or that's okay. Let's take a step. Let's take a break. Right. Because sometimes we
Yeah.
really get in our heads and need that extra support,
Oh,
and
yeah.
feel like we can have that little bit of trust fall,
Yep.
that we know that it's gonna be okay.
It's going to be okay.
And ultimately, I think you and I have touted this so many times before. Our goal as coaches is to get you all to a place that you don't need anybody else, because your sense of self-worth is so grounded and
Yep.
so, so clear that nothing it's really a matter of being able to kind of get to that core of
Yep.
groundedness so easily. We'll get
Yeah.
there, you guys. Don't worry.
Yeah.
We'll get there. But in the meantime, finding an accountability person,
Love
having
that.
that sense of having someone else to be able to start to gain that sense of safety and agency of it's okay. It is okay. And I think to your point, for so many in HR, men and women alike, it's that sense of feeling alone
Mm,
and sense of not really feeling that sense of being able to speak the truth.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what this podcast is all about. So people don't feel alone. You and I have been there, and we will continue to be there for one another and our listeners too. We're not, no HR woman left behind.
I love it. Never. All
Never.
right. Question number 5. What mindset shifts have been most powerful for you in transforming how you view your career or anyone's career in HR?
Ooh, I don't know if it's really about career necessarily, but this one thought came from Don Miguel Ruiz, wrote the Four Agreements, and he wrote another follow-up book called The Fifth Agreement, and it's more about application. And it's like halfway through the book, and I may be butchering this, so this is probably not verbatim, it's more paraphrasing, but it's something along the lines of the greatest battle we will ever have in our lifetime is the battle in our own brain. And that really hit me hard in terms of, oh my God, it's the thoughts I am choosing that is making my life a living hellhole. Because for those of you who are brand new to our podcast, I suffered with general anxiety for 25 years in HR. And I have a totally different mindset now. And that one thought really helped me twofold. One, it helped me understand the power of my brain. And did I want to continue to indulge in that quite literal battlefield in my brain? Or did I want to choose more helpful and useful thoughts? So I have a practice I do every day, and my mindset's better. But here's the other thing it really helped me with is the empathy piece. When I say I see behind people's armor, I mean it, because I remember that thought of the greatest battle people ever have in their life is the battle in their own brain. So when I see somebody else losing their shit in the workplace, treating someone else like crap, maybe gossiping, all of those types of things, I go right to empathy. I go right to curiosity as opposed to judgment. And this is taken practice. But all I think about is, I can't imagine the battle they're having in their own brain right now for them to be showing up in this way. And that just allows me to see behind the mask. It allows me to show up differently. It allows me to not take things personally. It allows me to stop working on talking points incessantly. And it allows me to just show up for that person in a totally, totally, totally different way. So that's been a huge, huge shift that I made probably about 3 years ago. And then a more recent mindset shift. Chief Brody, this one goes out to you. You're the one who shared this with me about a month ago. Other people's opinions are none of my business.
Oh, I love that.
I love that. And that, I think, I actually put that on my slide deck. That one is so powerful for me because I think in HR, we tend to be people pleasers. We are so worried about our boss's opinion, our peers' opinions, public's opinion on Glassdoor, internal employees, subordinates, whatever name you want to throw out there. What are people saying about me? What do they think about HR? What if you stopped worrying about everybody else's opinion of you and all you focused on was how you're showing up? How are you showing up? Because that is where you can make the difference. You can't change other people's opinions. You can't change their thoughts, but you can change your behavior. You can change the words that are coming out of your mouth. You can change that thought you're having about other people. You can lead with empathy. You can lead with curiosity. And that is what makes the difference. So those two mindset shifts have been massive game changers for me. It really has allowed me to just let go of the people who are not meant for me in my lifetime, if that makes sense. whether they're coaching clients, they're consulting clients, whether they're potential business partners. It's like, okay, well, if they're telling me that I'm not for them, okay, that's none of my business. Who am I going to be? What am I going to think? And what am I so committed to? And how am I moving forward? And talk about purpose and passion. That is just what I'm so laser focused on. And that's just been really helpful. I guess I have a third. I've got to bring this up because I haven't talked about this, Jen. So as I was driving from the Maryland airport to the conference, it was about an hour and a half away. I came upon a car accident. It's a pretty bad car accident. It was on 50 East. And everybody just stood there staring. People were out of their cars. I was about 5 cars back, 2-lane highway, speed limit's about 55. So I couldn't really see, but I saw everybody stopped and getting out of their cars and looking. And I was like, okay, I'm not the person who just sits back and watches. I am not that person. And I had spent 15 days in the hospital. So I think I felt like I was like part doctor, part nurse. I don't know. I don't know where this came from, but I drove on the shoulder. I got around the accident. I put on my hazards. I ran backwards. And there was a car full of teenage girls. They were 18. One of the girls had been in the passenger seat. She had hit her head. She was losing her mind. She was definitely concussed. I think she may have had a little bit more trauma. She didn't have the day of the week right, all those questions you ask people. And she was kind of walking back and forth, screaming at the top of her lungs. And there was a paramedic, a trained paramedic who was on scene, just happened to be like, saw the accident, put on their blue gloves, came over. There was another guy who came over. He was on 911. And I just took that girl and I sat her in my lap and I just held her. And she was just sobbing. And for me, I think that's just what HR does. We don't stand back and watch people in pain. We kind of run toward the pain. And I was like, I'm just going to sit here and hold this girl. I want to be there for her in like her worst nightmare and her friend. I mean, it was a whole thing. And I don't know if that's a shift, but I do think it's a whisper. I'm very, very attuned to my parents being in physical, mental, and emotional pain. And this poor girl on the side of the road, 18 years old, she's a child. And just to be able to give someone comfort until the ambulance actually got there, I don't know. I mean, who are we showing up as in this world? And I just encourage people to be there for people, right? Who knows? I mean, maybe they were the car who caused the accident. It didn't matter. This woman needed another human. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. Probably off topic, but it's really impacted me the last week. Thinking about, I think a lot of people think they need to have this big P purpose. And sometimes it's just a little P, and that's okay. That little P purpose for me was like, I'm going to be there for this girl.
Yeah.
The firefighters, the multiple ambulances, it was a big accident. They were so grateful. They're like, nobody ever stops for people. Thank you. Thank you so much. Right. And I didn't do it for the thank yous. I just wanted to help somebody. And it was just, I was driven by my little P purpose. That has nothing to do with HR, but my little P purpose of like, I've got to help these people and not just stand here and watch people lose their minds. I don't know. It's who we are in HR, I think.
Yeah.
Totally off topic.
No, not at all. I mean, really, really beautiful. And it shows like in terms of, a mindset around serving, a mindset around having compassion and empathy. I mean, all of that as you were talking, I was like, yeah, so related to, a why for HR is really about like whatever presents itself to you. It's about like how can I serve, how can I help as best as I can in this moment, and not having an attachment to it in any way. It's just kind of being there in the moment, and then being present.
Yeah.
Right. And that's wow. What an amazing story.
Yeah. It was, I can't stop thinking about it. Just that opportunity was there. Was it challenging? Yeah. Did I run toward it? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Because that's what we do in HR. Believe that. Okay, what about you? What about your mindset shifts? And what have been really powerful for you in transforming how you view your career?
For me, I think the number one thing of mindset shift that I've been able to do that's like a superpower is, and we've talked about this before, but it's the power of the pause. And it's one of
Mic
the,
drop.
well, it's
Yes.
really one of the biggest shifts for me that I've ever made, right? Because there, oh my gosh, I'm like, where do I even start with this? It's so easy for any human brain to get carried away when circumstances are heightened,
Oh yeah.
right? It's going to
Oh yeah.
happen without us having even conscious awareness to it. Always. It's always going to happen without that, because as soon as you have the triggers that are reacting within us, you and I know that that then is going to create a reaction that is really going to be difficult to have the ability to have that consciousness around if we're not really being aware of what is happening. And so often, I've seen people who come into my office and they're lit up about this and that and the other thing, and really they're not really paying attention, right? You start to get to that place of upset, and now things are just flying. And
Yep.
I think pausing and the power of the pause is really the ability to be able to do similar to what you said a little bit earlier, is just be able to get really clear around, how do I want to be right now? How am
Oh,
I, right? How am I right now? And how do I want to be? And what do I need to do? What do I need to choose to make that a reality? And these are things like, we've been talking about. These are superpowers that 99% of us don't really realize we have available to us,
yes.
especially when we've been triggered, especially when there's some form of, intensity within the situation. And
Yeah.
so to be able to slow that down, to be able to kind of be aware of what's happening within, and then also what we really want, right? And so how
Mm,
can you start to move in that direction? It's really about taking those baby steps, one situation at a time. And that, I think, the other thing too I'll say about that is it can be so frustrating sometimes to be able to kind of know intellectually the mindset shifts I want to have, right? Oh, I want to be more aware, and I want to be more conscious, and I want to be this, and I want to be that. And at the end of the day, when the triggers happen, they happen.
it happened.
Right? And it's going to be after the fact that it's like, oh my gosh, why did I say this, or why did I do this? That, my friends, that right there is the power that we have. And so that's my number two, is one, the pause in the moment. What can we
Yes.
give ourselves in that moment to be able to slow ourselves down so we can be aware of how we want to be?
Yep.
And then two is the power of reflection, right? The huge power of being able to reflect post experience, post situation. And that, I am, it's, oh, it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine as an HR person, because very few people enjoy that part, right? Very few people
Mm,
really want to be able to relive and go back when they have maybe engaged in a behavior or action that they're not proud of. And so easily we just want to move away, move beyond, let's move past, let's get away from it, versus that power of being able to reflect back and
yeah.
understand it's okay. We don't need to sit here in judgment of it. What we're doing is learning, and that's how we grow. To
Yeah.
reflect back on these stumbles and the steps that we have along the way and be able to build from it. Because if we're not doing that, we're missing a massive opportunity within ourselves to be able to kind of gain that sense of understanding of ourselves so we can continue to be a better version of ourselves.
There was so much in there. I was like ready to jump through the screen. I loved all of that. All of that. And there's neuroscience data behind what you said about the power of the pause, that we can't control that fight or flight when it happens. We can't. Dr. Jill Taylor out of Harvard says it takes 90 seconds for the brain to process that emotion. So it's something I brought up at the Maryland Trumm conference. I'm like, give yourself 90 seconds. Breathe. Pause. If there's a tornado, also known as an upset employee, who comes in your office, give them grace for 90 seconds because they are not going to be able to cool their jets. They're just not. They're just going to be a walking shitstorm. And you may be a walking shit. It's okay. But after 90 seconds, it's the thoughts we do choose. Like you were saying, that power of reflection, all of that is so good. So good. And the power of the pause. Oh my God. I'll never forget when one of the women in HR Empower Hour brought that up. She's like, the power of the pause. And I was like, oh, that is just good. That is so good. Yeah. And reflection all day long. So good. Such good advice for our listeners. Thanks for those ads. That's amazing.
Well, ditto right back to you. This has been so informative for me as well. So, okay, well, last question as we wrap up today.
Okay.
What advice would you give to someone who feels stuck in their HR career and is struggling with staying passionate about their job?
I mean, what the very first coach I ever hired did with me about halfway through our 12-week coaching program was my homework was to go home and figure out what I loved about HR. Because all my brain did at the time, I suffered with victim mentality. A lot of people suffer with it. They don't even know. I could rattle off everything I hated about HR. I hate open enrollment. I hate people don't get their forms in on time. I hate when people ghost me in the interviewing process. I hate when my boss knows I'm super busy and he throws another thing on my plate. I mean, that is what the human brain is wired to do from the amygdala. I didn't understand the power of the prefrontal cortex. So she, as a very trained and gifted coach, gave me that homework of, but what do you love? So and it came to me pretty quickly. I had a week to get my homework done. And what I loved, mediation. I mean, not every HR person says, I love mediation. And I love helping people when they're in conflict. I just do. I'm a certified mediator. I love it. And a part of that is also part of the advice is like, own your HR crazy. Don't judge yourself. Don't worry about what anyone else thinks. If you love mediation, that's awesome. If you love employee relations, awesome. Think about what you do love in HR, because after, at our next session, I was like, I love mediation. She's like, great, put a business plan together around it. And here I am 2.5 years later with an extremely successful coaching and consulting business. And I do mediation often. I just had a follow-up with an organization while I was in Maryland, a follow-up via Zoom, all about mediation. So there you go. Think about what you do love. And if the first thing that comes to you seems a little strange, it's probably your truth. So stick with it and be okay. Own your HR crazy. Jen, what about you? What advice would you give?
It's similar. It's my what I wrote down is about, when we're at a place where things just don't feel right. It could be in the job, it could be at home, it could be this, it could be that. We're going through a chapter where something just feels off. Yes. One of the things that I learned years ago through a training that I did is the process of doing a personal inventory.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about that here as well. And what you're talking about is so similar, right? Is really kind of taking from the focus of what's wrong, what's bad, what's going wrong, and really just being able to be super thoughtful about the whole picture.
Yeah.
right? The truth of the picture, and then being able to rank or use a scale. I mean, whatever works for the person to be able to start to just break that down. And so when I say an inventory is, going through and looking at, if you're feeling the burnout within the job, you're feeling the burnout within yourself, going through and starting to get clear about what are the things that are really factors that are that are you're looking at within, trying to assess. And so if
Mm.
it's your job, then going through and really breaking down the mediation, the employee relations, the benefits, the workers comp, and then being just super honest with ourselves around where that falls. Because I think so often what ends up happening in HR and in anywhere really is we get so caught up in the have tos and the must haves and the should haves and the,
Oh.
all of these kind of things that kind of get us caught in a lot of messiness. But if
Mhm.
we can get really clear and be able to have, an inventory within ourselves around what is working well, what is not working well,
Yeah.
and then be able to have that sense of clarity that can have a more clear and defined approach around where do you start. Where do I start now that I can recognize based on the inventory of where I see the strengths and what's going well, and where do I see the gaps and the
Mm.
opportunities. And so for anyone who's ever been struggling and trying to find their way and really kind of having that sense of feeling lost, I think this is a tool that can really help get
Yeah.
a picture of
Oh, yeah.
what is it. Because rather than kind of having that overwhelm around with this area and that area, it's really about kind of getting that more clearly defined. And
Mm.
then from that place, I recommend, and I know you would agree with this, is don't do it alone. Don't
Don't do it
try to
alone.
suffer in silence. Don't try to figure out something that is as big as a career and a job and, all of these things. I think so often we get in these, overwhelmed cycles where we think we got to be the ones to figure out what how we have to figure it all out, versus being able to say pause, right? And being able to have that confidence to go and ask and have that open dialogue with someone else where you can say, hey, here's what's going on for me, here's what's coming out strong and good, and here's where I'm really struggling. And there's something about that. I mean, whether it's a coach, whether it's a therapist, there's something about that release of being
Yes.
able to get out that truth that can have a massive, massive impact on helping then get some clarity around how to kind of get some start kind of getting a plan together and start setting
So good.
goals on how to actually be able to shift it.
Yeah, because if you could have figured this out on your own, you would have.
Yeah.
It's okay to ask for help. And I do think HR people pride themselves on being the help for the organization. Of course we need help. So ask for it. Of
Yeah.
course we do. We have to model the behavior we expect to see in others, right? So use that to your advantage. You expect others to ask for help, you got to ask for help too. Do
Sorry,
it.
y'all. Got to do it.
Got to do
No,
it.
I mean, it's,
Yeah, nice directive there, Kath.
just
Just
do
do
it.
it.
But I mean, in all truth about it, I think both you and I can agree, and those that we've worked with agree that when you are not kind of trying to hold on to trying to figure out all the answers on your own and start to reach out and start having those conversations, there's something pretty freaking magical
Oh, it's
that can
freedom.
come out of that. Yeah,
It's
freedom. That's
exhausting
the word
holding
I was
on.
looking for.
That is exhausting. That is
Yeah.
straight. I mean, talk about probably the reason why someone's feeling no purpose and no passion or less than the amount that they
Yeah.
want to. You're exhausted from holding on so tight.
Yeah.
Time to let go.
Yeah. Yeah. Time
Yeah.
to let go. Well, with that, Let's go.
Let's go.
So,
I
with
agree.
that, we are going to wrap up today's episode. It's been such a good conversation. Thank you so much, Katherine.
I mean, what
And
would my Friday nights be without you, Jen? Seriously.
oh,
I love
it's
spending
so
time with you. I really, my energy goes from whatever it is to like 10 notches higher every time we do a podcast. Thank you. You bring so
every
much to my
single
life.
time.
It's unreal.
Thank you. Thank you. I wholeheartedly second that. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening and for watching. And if you haven't already, please make sure to download our podcast and like and review it. We are growing and we are excited to continue to get out there and get out in the world and continue to grow this little podcast. So
Absolutely.
don't forget, y'all, every day is a great day to thrive and shine in HR. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, y'all.